Next, on Currents News, education overload. Cash-strapped families trying to pay for college as the pandemic crushes their finances. Plus, Governor Cuomo under fire after a damning report finds nursing home deaths were severely underreported in the state of New York. Then, the domestic terror threat. Could houses of worship be targeted? And kids and coding. One Catholic school in Bushwick is making sure their students have a leg up on technology. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. February marks the start of Financial Aid Awareness Month, something 85% of all U.S. college students rely on. But since the pandemic, the need for financial aid has exploded. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has the story of one St. Francis College student whose life will never be the same because of COVID.
The ongoing pandemic has thrown college students navigating their way into adulthood off track without warning.
It was right in the middle of the semester, and I was trying to get my grades together, get my classes together.
St. Francis College sophomore Aaliyah Spate had a devastating year. Her problems were bigger than money.
Back in April, I lost my father due to COVID, and that was my only parent because I lost my mother back when I was 11 years old.
Losing her father changed everything, including how she would pay tuition. Aaliyah did what many students are afraid to do. She asked her school for help and is now one of nearly 300 recipients of aid from the Terrier for Terrier Relief Fund.
When she applied for the Terrier for Terrier Relief Fund, we wanted to assist her in a very special way.
St. Francis College made sure Aaliyah could continue her Catholic education. It's also providing financial aid from the CARES Act to more than 1,300 students.
As a mission-driven institution, the St. Francis College community rallies around those who need it most.
St. Francis has its own way of helping out, but in April 2020, Swift Student came onto the scene. It's a free online tool that helps students ask their colleges for additional financial aid.
Within 3 days, the tool was being used actively in all 50 states. And traffic has been consistent and national since then. We've now served more than 60,000 people.
A survey by one class shows 56% of college freshmen and sophomores say they can no longer afford tuition because of COVID-19.
Students are tremendously affected by the job losses that are happening. We're seeing now that many more students are reporting that they are food and housing insecure than they've ever been before.
For students like Aaliyah, financial aid is more than just money.
I'm not completely alone with things, and that I have people that are looking out for me.
It's a lifeline after so much loss. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Governor Andrew Cuomo and his administration are being accused of undercounting coronavirus deaths in New York nursing homes by as much as 50%. In a 76-page report just released, the Attorney General of New York says the state only counted residents who died in actual facilities instead of including patients who were transferred to hospitals because of COVID-related illnesses and died there. After a months-long investigation into the handling of elder care facilities across the state, the AG's office released these findings: that there was a lack of compliance with infection control protocols, insufficient PPE for nursing home staff, and insufficient testing of residents and staff. Also at issue, government guidance requiring the admission of COVID patients into nursing homes that may have put residents at increased risk of harm. The response by some state leaders has been swift and highly critical. New York's Democratic Majority Leader vowing to dig into the report, while the chair of New York's Conservative Party released this statement. The report confirms what millions of New Yorkers already suspected. Governor Andrew Cuomo and his administration willfully manipulated data to hide the number of deaths caused by their inexplicably foolish policy decisions. The governor tried to wash his hands of their deaths, and now he has been found out. An honorable leader would resign under such circumstances. Making good on a campaign promise, President Joe Biden is reopening enrollment for the Affordable Care Act. Part of a series of executive actions aimed at addressing health care, Biden's order directs officials to reopen enrollment to those who need coverage from February 15th until May 15th. It is also requiring agencies to re-examine policies that limit access to health care. The new chief of the Capitol Police announced today that the fencing around the U.S. Capitol complex will become permanent. This as Senate Republicans tried to hold up the confirmation of Biden's pick for Homeland Security Secretary, saying he has not been fully vetted. The DHS continues to warn about the threat of extremist violence in the weeks to come. John Lawrence reports.
22 days after the deadly siege on the U.S. Capitol, significant tensions remain.
There's going to have to be some serious anarchy that goes on. Otherwise, nothing's going to change.
Bring in the firing squad.
These are two comments New York Times editor Stuart THOMPSON obtained from a QAnon chat room in the days surrounding the siege.
For them, this is, a big crime that's been perpetrated and they're seeking justice.
Thompson says many of these followers are confused that predictions Joe Biden wouldn't take office didn't come true.
Instead of saying, the things we were believing in were nonsense, they say we were relying on the wrong person. We were relying on Trump to do it all, and now it's up to us to do it.
The Department of Homeland Security is warning the U.S. that extremists, some of whom oppose the Biden administration, could continue to mobilize to incite or commit violence.
What soft locations across the country may be targeted by these folks? Does it include critical infrastructure? Does it include houses of worship? We need to be prepared for all threats across a multitude of venues in this country.
Although at least 150 people have been federally charged in the Capitol attack, DHS officials say the domestic extremists may feel emboldened by the siege. I'm John Lawrence reporting.
Because of the heightened security concerns in the nation's capital, along with the pandemic, Friday's March for Life will be mostly virtual. Instead of thousands of marchers, a small group of pro-life advocates will be in D.C. Should you participate virtually, the Pope has granted a plenary indulgence. Thursday's opening Mass for the National Prayer Vigil for Life at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception will air live here on Net TV. And Friday's closing Mass for the U.S. Bishop's 9-day novena at the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph will also air on Net TV. Currents News and The Tablet will have full coverage of the March for Life. Be sure to check out currentsny.tv and thetablet.org for the latest reports on the D.C. event. And breaking today, the Biden administration says they will be reversing the Mexico City policy. That policy prohibits U.S. funding of foreign organizations that promote abortions as a method of family planning. The rule was first instituted by President Reagan in 1984. Meanwhile, Republicans on Capitol Hill are fighting for the unborn. Some 200 GOP members of Congress signed a letter vowing to protect the HYDE Amendment. The law prevents the use of taxpayer dollars for abortion. During the presidential campaign, Biden reversed his long-standing support for the HYDE Amendment, so Republicans are pushing back against the possibility he will repeal it. One woman who's leading the fight for the unborn here in New York says we're facing some additional challenges because of the changes in the White House and Congress. Kathleen Gallagher, director of pro-life activities for the New York State Catholic Conference, joins us now. And Kathleen, now that there is a pro-choice administration in Washington, talk about what progress pro-life advocates can make legislatively.
Well, there's no doubt, Christine, that it's going to be very challenging with the new administration. Just within the last few hours, the Biden administration has announced that they're going to roll back the Mexico City policy, which stopped our federal taxpayer dollars from funding abortions overseas. They're also looking at ways to do that here domestically to allow our federal tax dollars to fund abortions through Medicaid. So no doubt it's going to be very challenging, but we can't give up the fight, not even a little bit.
Absolutely. You recently wrote a column for The Tablet ahead of the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. You said, a society which allows innocent infants to be arbitrarily destroyed under the mantle of law will inevitably undermine respect for lives in other contexts. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that over the years, 48 years now that abortion has been legal in the United States, it's hardened us. It's hardened society as a whole, and we don't see the intrinsic underlying value in each and every irreplaceable human being. And that extends not just the unborn, but to the born and to the elderly and to the sickly and to those who are most vulnerable. We really have to expand our vision of what it is to be pro-life, to stand up for life in every context that it's threatened, whether it's through poverty or racism or abortion or physician-assisted suicide. We need to stand up for life.
Now, I hear you've been working on projects to change people's hearts and minds. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I mean, legislative victories are important, political victories are important, but at the end of the day, I think we have to get back to basics and focus on converting hearts and minds. So we've been working on some projects to give people dialogue principles to help them have civil and respectful conversations about these difficult life issues. We're never going to persuade people if we're yelling at them. We're never going to persuade people through divisive politics. We have to get back to basics. We have to actively listen to people who disagree with us. We have to find common ground with them, and we have to engage in respectful civil conversations.
And how are you doing that? Through different dioceses?
Yes, we've been working first with the Diocese of Syracuse to do these training workshops for people who work for the church, people who are Catholic, people who are pro-life, to help them understand dialogue principles to start engaging in civil, respectful conversations about the whole gamut of life issues.
Sure. Now, what can everyone who's watching from home do to help the cause?
Well, one very specific thing they can do is go to our website, nyscatholic.org. That's the New York State Catholic Conference. And they can take action by urging their elected officials to reject assisted suicide as a state policy. We've seen far too many deaths of the elderly and the sickly during this pandemic. We can't add to that number by legalizing assisted suicide.
All right, Kathleen Gallagher, Director of Pro-Life Activities at New York State Catholic Conference. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And as Kathleen mentioned, if you'd like to get involved and make a difference, head on over to nyscatholic.org, where you can urge elected officials to support a host of pro-life issues. There's a lot more news headed your way. Bishop DiMarzio joins us after the break for his weekly Into the Deep discussion. Plus,
Catholic art taking on new forms during the pandemic. I'm Jessica Easthope with 3 artists, all from different disciplines, who say their faith and careers have been transformed.
And kids and coding. St. Brigid's is using technology to prepare kids for the future. We'll explain coming up.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
Students at one Bushwick Catholic school are coding their way into the future. Experts say it helps with everything from creativity and math to communication and confidence. Currents News' Emily Drewby is here to tell us more.
They're like a prize at the end.
Most kids play games. Ellie Perez builds them.
I'm proud of it. I like to see people enjoy the game that I make.
From rescuing gifts from the Grinch to escaping a timed maze, Ellie thought up, designed, drew out, and coded these games into existence.
I feel like through my coding, I could express myself, my creativity, and it just helps me relax.
Ellie learned how to do this at St. Brigid, St. Francis Cabrini Catholic Academy in Bushwick, and she's not the only one. The idea came from math and technology teacher Jose Martinez. He wanted to bring coding to the school, but he knew he needed to find a way to make it interesting to his young students.
I know they play games. I thought that making games is something that could really get them excited.
For years, educators have pushed to teach coding in schools, saying it improves problem solving and logical thinking. It has become an important skill in the job market, and it pays. One study found jobs that use coding skills pay an average of $22,000 more a year. Nonprofit Code.org says while 90% of parents want their kids to study computer science, only about 47% of high schools actually teach it, putting St. Brigid, a nursery through 8th grade school, ahead of the curve.
Well, I'm thinking about their future, so I want them to get the most out of the school that they can get. Yeah, and I want them to have good memories. I want them to remember, the fun they had here.
Through this problem, students not only build the games, but publish them for anyone to play. The code is even made public, helping other students learn. Ellie will continue coding, now a beloved hobby, and Jose says he plans to grow the program next year. In Bushwick, Brooklyn, Emily Druby, Currents News.
So awesome. Helping to spread the faith to every continent, the Catholic Church has been sending out missionaries for centuries. And according to the Holy See, there are still people dying for their faith today. Here to talk more about that is the Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio, who sits down with the former editor of the tablet, Ed Wilkinson, for this week's Into the Deep. Ed.
Thank you. Bishop DiMarzio is with us today, and we're going to talk about the plight of missionaries around the world today. Bishop, we used to think that when we were kids that probably we would not be called to shed our blood for Jesus, in this day and age. But many missionaries who actually do face life and death situations. Is it really that dangerous in the missions? What's your sense of it?
Well, it is. Every year the Vatican does take a toll of how many missionaries have been murdered. And I think this year we're up to about 20. So it's not a rare occurrence because especially in these mission countries, various groups, extremist groups, see the church as an enemy and the missionaries as bringing sometimes Western culture where they're against Western culture. There are many reasons against the Christian faith. So being a missionary is not an easy job and it's very risky.
Of course, in our diocese, we're very aware of Bishop Francis Ford, whose cause for beatification is now before the Vatican, and we look at him as somebody who changed people's views of missionary work. He felt that the church should be very much part of the culture in which it is involved. How is the cause for the canonization going for Bishop Ford?
Well, Bishop Ford, as we know, worked in China as a Maryknoll missionary, became a bishop there, and tried to inculcate the church, enculturate the church into the Chinese culture as best he could. Unfortunately, again, with the communist revolution in China, he was taken prisoner and in effect became a martyr because he was really starved to death. And on the last death march, they took him out of prison and marched him until he dropped and was just buried in we're not sure where he was buried actually.
Yeah. Some people are not sure whether he technically qualifies as a martyr because nobody actually saw him die, or do you think the church will regard him as a martyr as it considers his cause?
Well, it's a toss-up. He may not, but there's so many other merits. It doesn't necessarily mean a martyr. So I think we're going to see the regular route right now in the cause of Bishop Ford.
Mm-hmm. Bishop, you've been to the missions many times, and you have visited some Brooklyn priests who are missionaries around the world. What continues to motivate people to go to the missions to evangelize in that way?
Well, I think it is faith. It's about faith, and when you see these mission territories and the plight of people, there's a religious issue certainly uppermost in the minds of missionaries, but the plight of people in these countries needs also help. So they put themselves at risk, but they do with all their heart and soul try to better the lives of the people whom they evangelize at the same time.
Okay. Bishop, thanks so much for your time today, and we'll talk to you again.
You're welcome. Take care.
Okay, now we throw it back to the news desk.
Thanks, Ed. Still to come on Currents News.
Pandemic really actually gave me the time to sit back, think about my next move, and then make the move.
Finding inspiration in faith, how Catholic artists are keeping their careers alive during the pandemic. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Now to a COVID silver lining. At a time when health and safety concerns are top of mind because of the virus, artists always seem to find a way to keep their creative juices flowing. Currents News' Jessica Easthope spoke with 3 Catholic artists who say the pandemic has been a blessing for their art and their faith.
Meet Tony Lipari.
First, I tried to draw them
Mindy
on
Steffen.
This was my first camera.
And Jake Hart, 3 different artists who have managed to keep hope and their careers alive the past year against all odds.
We've been very productive during this time, but you can't play out.
I was very, very fortunate. It was really like God's timing.
To me, it was a huge blessing.
Each of their industries have taken a major hit, but inside the 4 walls of their New York City apartments, these artists have thought outside the box.
The second verse is kind of addressed to God.
They're all thriving, having found a creative niche.
So this is Airhead.
And stronger connection with God during the pandemic.
This gave us time where you can't play out. We made use of just all this time for writing.
Known professionally as Rickshaw, Tony Lipari formed a band right before New York City went on lockdown. This is the last show the punk rap group performed together. And though the live music industry has plummeted and gigs have felt like a thing of the past, Rickshaw pushed forward.
Because of this, we've actually written about an album's worth of material. Without this, maybe some of that material wouldn't exist, maybe all of it.
It's obviously Joan of Arc.
For cartoonist known as Mindy Indy, keeping her head down and her pencil to paper has worked.
So this is Chronomonium NYC.
In February of 2020, Mindy took on 2 big projects, a sci-fi comic of her own and a series of children's books about the saints.
We can really, learn a lot from the saints and draw strength from them. This is him seeing the future.
The pandemic allowed her to reconnect with her faith and focus on her talents without the rush.
I do feel more connection in the quietness and the slowing down.
Each roll of film probably has about 2 minutes.
Like Tony and Mindy, Jake Hart also sees this crisis through a different lens.
The pandemic really actually gave me the time to sit back, think about my next move, and then make the move. You can already see the kind of like grain.
As a Catholic filmmaker, Jake's art is focused on a mystical view of faith. His most recent film was shot entirely during the pandemic with his collection of vintage cameras. The footage is grainy, but now he says the vision for his career is clear.
Putting the films together in a collection, putting together a website, and putting together a story and why I was doing this and why I wanted to share these films.
He was all into languages and like Latin.
These artists couldn't be more different.
Confronting loss.
But what they have in common is trusting God's plan. Though they're not thankful for the pandemic, they've been able to focus on the good, the time it's given them to create.
She's very inspiring.
Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.